Hello, hello. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lynn Dome. I'm Women in Cybersecurity Executive Director. We often go by our acronym WiCyS, which is spelled WICYS, and we pronounce it WiCyS like we sisters because that's exactly what we are. We are a global cyber sisterhood. So it's a great pleasure to be here today with David from Fortinet as he reviews and goes over retraining the brain with cyber attacks. We're super excited to have this presentation. Fortinet has been a fabulous strategic partner of ours, and their engagement just keeps on getting better and better. So we're loving every second of it. And we're so happy that you're able to share a piece of your afternoon with us today to review this information as well. So a little bit about the WiCyS organization is we're a 501c3 nonprofit. We have over 5,000, actually 5,800 members right now with representation in over 70 countries. Our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. And we have, in addition to our 5,800 members, we have 51 professional affiliates, which are mini WiCyS organizations. And they're all throughout Africa, Australia, Canada, France, India, Pakistan, the UK, and throughout the United States. We have specialty affiliates like WiCyS Artificial Intelligence, WiCyS BISO, WiCyS Critical Infrastructure. We have Cloud Security, LGBTQ plus Pride, WiCyS Neurodiversity, and so many more. And on top of that, we have over 170 student chapters with that initiative growing at a rapid rate. But what we do to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity is that we provide opportunities such as the webinar you're joining us with today. We have an online member forum where all our members can network and connect, and we have many different skill development training programs as well. We have scholarships, grants, and awards not only to our conference, which is March 16th through the 18th in Denver, Colorado, which, by the way, scholarships, grants, and award applications open up September 5th, so keep that on your radar. But we also offer scholarships, grants, and awards to other conferences as well. We have webinar series, annual conferences, cyber talent emergency funds, speaking and media opportunities so our members can be what others can see. And that's the cybersecurity professionals that they are. Our Job Board Plus Plus is available 24/7, year round. We have over 60 strategic partners that post their jobs there, and all our members have access to upload their resumes and update their profiles and get recruited from the Job Board Plus Plus. We have a virtual career fair, which, by the way, is taking place tomorrow at 11 a.m. So if you're not in the know-how of that already, please check out our website under events and join us here tomorrow. And we have apprenticeships, internships, leadership summits, leadership series, leadership workshops. We have a speakers bureau, a mentor-mentee program, and an equity advocacy committee, which ensures that WiCyS internally and externally continue to lead with equity, allyship, and inclusion. We have all that and so much more thanks to our strategic partners. And our tier one partners are AWS, Bloomberg, Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, Cisco, Fortinet, that brings us the fabulous webinar here today. We have Google, Intel, Lockheed Martin, Meta, Microsoft, Optimism, India National Labs, SentinelOne, and so many more. So we have David here today speaking on a great topic, and I know we have a lot of registrants that are joining us. So if you have any questions, please put them in the bottom of your screen. There's a chat section, and David will answer your questions live. And in addition to that, if you haven't already subscribed to the newsletter, check us out, WiCyS.org. You hit the subscribe button, and you'll never miss a beat of all things WiCyS. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and pass the mic on over to David to take it from here.
Great, Lynn. And thank you very much. And just really want to say thank you to everybody who's attending today and giving me the opportunity to speak to WiCyS. Very much appreciate it. So my name is Dave Lordy. I'm Director of Product Marketing at Fortinet, responsible for our email security, phishing simulation, security awareness and training solutions, in addition to some other areas. And I'm going to be talking to you today about why cyber attacks are successful and how security awareness aims to take back control. And as you can imagine, I'm going to be talking a lot about kind of that human side of this equation, which we'll get to. Real quick, as Lynn mentioned, a little bit about Fortinet. At Fortinet, we've made a real commitment to training today and tomorrow's cybersecurity professionals. We've done that through the Fortinet Training Institute, which has been around a number of years. But the Fortinet Training Institute has a broader range of different training that's made available free for people to enhance their knowledge of cybersecurity principles and other topics. But also they do things like security awareness and training to help make workforces and individuals more cyber aware, given the risks associated with uninformed employees, or just in your own personal lives, right? Being uninformed about things to watch for when you're on your computer, on your mobile device, and so on. So lots of great programs that the Fortinet Training Institute does on behalf of Fortinet. We're real excited for those different activities, as well as the opportunity to speak with you today. Okay. So I'm going to, in this webinar, I'm going to cover a lot of ground here. Hopefully you'll find it pretty interesting. It was a pretty interesting topic for me to kind of put together. I'm going to talk about the threat landscape today as it relates to your employees. I'm going to talk about psychology of scams, how to reduce susceptibility and risk. Then I'll get into kind of, what's the drivers behind security awareness, and what does it need to be doing for you. And then I'll follow it up with a little bit of a kind of a quick exercise related to email that I think kind of brings home some of the messages here. So if you get down to it, right, why do we need security awareness and training? Well, it's because unfortunately we have people out there, threat actors, who are doing things that they really shouldn't be, and targeting organizations and individuals for that matter, right, to achieve some type of objective, whether that objective is to get a hold of data, whether that's to steal your identity, whether that's to get into a facility or drop ransomware into an organization, etc. So unfortunately, we have threat actors out there that are doing this, and when it comes to employees in particular, this represents really kind of a ripe area and an easier pathway for threat actors to go through as they try to steal that data or steal financial resources or enact wire transfers and so on. A few key stats here to kind of make this point. These are from the latest Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report of 2022. And you can see here on the left that of the successful breaches that they reviewed in this latest report, 82% involved the human element. And what that human element involves, right, it's any time an employee is contributing to the breach itself. So this could be, an employee lost their credentials, or the credentials were stolen. Could be an employee clicked on something within a phishing email. Could be some type of misuse, or just errors, or poor choices in terms of behavior, or maybe they lost a laptop and so on. But it's a staggering statistic that alone tells you the impact that your employee workforces have when it comes to introducing risk to an organization. In the middle, this gets a little more specific to phishing emails. And just so you know, phishing email, because phishing and email represents a direct pathway for threat actors to go through to reach your employees. 36% of successful breaches involve phishing. So it's clearly a really important area when it comes to awareness. On the right, you can see ransomware here is up to 25% involvement in successful breaches. That is actually doubled from the prior period, and that prior period doubled from the one before that. So we're really seeing where ransomware is completely mainstream. Organizations have indicated that this is their biggest concern overall when it comes to threats. And as all the different articles we see and media, you can understand why. When we look at what bad actors are after typically, right? Usually it's something around data, monetary assets, and then there may be something in terms of getting physical access or assets, right? Which on this latter is more probably about more thievery, right? Somebody trying to steal something. Although getting a hold of a laptop with maybe a sensitive database downloaded onto it certainly has value. On the left, in terms of data, you can see the broad range of records. And if you have ever seen kind of reports on the underground where these illicit data is sold, you'd realize that there's a whole lot of categories of data that threat actors will take and try to sell in the underground marketplace. Interesting thing is that the acquisition of data has kind of been on the decline in favor of doing things like ransomware, where ransomware is arguably easier because the tools are easily available to get a hold of and launch ransomware attacks. And also because ransomware really represents a faster time to money for threat actors. So it just makes sense that, hey, the data, trying to get data from you is kind of a more indirect way to get money from you ultimately, versus ransomware being a very quick hit and faster time to money for threat actors. In terms of, well, what does this amount to in terms of in respect to losses? Well, the FBI came out with some stats from last year in their internet crime report, and they indicated they estimated that they'd seen about 850,000 complaints come through, and the losses were about 6.9 billion in that regard. I projected this into 2022 to 10.4 billion and 1.1 billion in terms of claims. So clearly the damage and the cost to organizations is increasing, but my contention here is that, this just represents what's reported to the FBI, and the FBI investigated and assessed. But imagine how much wasn't communicated to the FBI or communicated to any authority for that matter. And you can imagine that this figure is really grossly underrepresented. All right, so the threat landscape, as I talked about, really drives, it's the beginning of everything in terms of why we need security awareness and, of course, have it in a lot of organizations. But let's talk about the psychology of scams. Thought this would be kind of an interesting interesting area to hit on. And you'll notice I'm going to talk about scams and I'm going to talk about cyber attacks, right? Because if you think of a Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap between what's going on with a given cyber attack or threat actor versus a scammer, right? And so I wanted to call out a few differences here between them, right? And first of all, well, is there a difference? Yeah, to some degree, but there's, like I said, there's certainly overlap. But threat actors, unlike your scammers, your typical kind of age-old scammers, threat actors have complete anonymity on their side, right? Often we can't see, hear, or talk to them firsthand, unless that happens to be the particular tactic that they're going to take, right? So if a threat actor is doing social engineering and they call you on the phone, that represents where they're exposing themselves to some degree, but that's still different than a lot of traditional scammers who rely on phone systems or other mechanisms, right, to scam you. Threat actors are typically seeking data, digital access, and assets from people and organizations. They can be state-sponsored. You don't see that generally on the scamming side, as far as I know. Threat actors see employees as an easier path to achieving their objectives, right? I mean, back to, if you think about email is the one pathway that they can go that is very direct to an employee, right? Whether they're spraying a number of employees or whether they're targeting one or a few employees. And that employee isn't necessarily the end victim, right? They're kind of they're just that pathway. The real victim is going to be the organization in most respects, whether that organization now is subject to a ransomware ransom that they have to pay to get their data decrypted, or promise that the threat actor won't divulge that data that they've already exfiltrated. So a little bit of difference between these I just wanted to call out. But when we get into kind of this section and talking, I'm going to be talking about scams and, psychology around scams as well as threat actors a little bit interchangeably, because these things play into them. And as you'll see. First thing, though, I wanted to kind of make this an interactive session as well. So I wanted to ask a poll question and find out what your experience, the audience here, is with scams. Have you ever been scammed? And I'm going to push that out. Give me one moment. Okay, so I'm going to send this poll out. We won't see the results for a little bit, so I'm going to keep talking. But yeah, just want to understand, have you ever been the victim of a scam? I'll tell you flat out, I have. I can name probably 3: taxi drivers, Istanbul, Turkey, and what was the other one? Small time. Fortunately, it's been small time, and of course, you learn from these things and you get smarter and wiser, you hope. All right, so I'm going to keep on talking Lynn, am I able to keep it advancing the slide without any problem?
No problem at all.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so as you're filling out that slide, I'm curious, to see how many believe it'll never happen to you. And this is really kind of a really important point to make, right? Everybody thinks, hey, it'll never happen to me, or a lot of people do. But the fact is, that's probably the one behavior you don't want to have, the one mindset you don't want to have when it comes to scams. And I got this quote from an article in Reader's Digest, republished from AARP. And this is a telemarketer scammer who did telemarketing scams for about 20 plus years. Indicates that they're very good at this. And here's their quote, right? You might be thinking, oh, those get rich quick scams are obvious. I'd never fall for one. When I hear someone say that only stupid people fall for fraud, I feel like asking for that person's phone number. But here's the thing. I didn't want to talk to stupid people because stupid people don't have $50,000 lying around to give me. You'd be amazed at how many doctors, lawyers, engineers, and college professors I have ripped off. So really kind of hits the point, right, that in reality, anybody can be scammed. And, just to kind of call out something here, which is kind of, a bias. And I'm going to talk about a number of biases that play into how people get scammed. Here's the first one. They call it fundamental attribution error. And it's the sense of, when we know somebody's gotten scammed, you're kind of like incredulous. You're like, wow, gosh, how could they do that? How could they, let that happen? And I have an experience with a friend of my wife and I who got scammed earlier this year for quite a bit of money. And you think, you kind of think that out of the gate. But then you really have to realize, hey, it's not their fault. This happens. It's not like they're gullible, right? There's biases that play in here. There's things that the effect that a threat actor or a scammer play on. And it's just important to recognize that these people aren't at fault. They just got caught at the wrong time in the right and wrong frame of mind and just couldn't see what they needed to see as we could see if we were standing, right, 10 feet, behind watching. So I wanted to pull some influence mechanisms, and this is from Dr. Robert Cialdini from The Psychology of Persuasion. And these are influencer, tactics. And, all of these, right, are important for influencing, but a few of these are particularly effective when it comes to threat actors trying to target their victims and play on them, whether it's through social engineering channels or email or it's a scammer for that matter. Reciprocity is all about they give you something and then you feel a little more compelled to give them something, right? As an example that was cited in an article I read, when a waiter gives a mint at the end of your meal, they've seen data that shows that will increase your likelihood to give a tip as much as 20%, right? Consistency. When a threat actor or scammer is working with somebody, they get them to give a little bit of an amount, let's say, just a little, and then they ask for a little more. And so there's this consistency principle that starts to play a role there. Authority, we're going to talk about that coming up. And then scarcity, we're going to talk about this one too, which is kind of the sense of giving people a sense of, hey, you need to do this because it won't last, the offer won't last, or circumstances are going to change, or the price is going to change, etc. But a number of key influence mechanisms that in the wrong hands by somebody who's knowledgeable and gives people a leg up on how to make victims, whether it's a threat actor, whether it's a scammer. So it's important to kind of note here how we make decisions falls into two buckets to a large degree. System one thinking. This is a framework or approach by a gentleman of Daniel Kahneman and Shane Frederick. It's this idea that we have two kind of modes of how we make decisions. System one thinking is very rapid, quick fire decision making, right? Whereas system two is more methodical. It's like we're taking an extra moment, we're pausing to think through what's going on here. Well, as you can imagine, and lots of scams and a lot of activities that threat actors do, they like to play on the system one thinking here. They're going to do everything they can to keep you off balance as you go, right? And it just kind of highlights this need of trying to step back away from that that system one thinking and get into a system two mode, but it's very hard if you're not really consciously thinking about it. But this plays into one of the other biases here, which is time pressures or urgency bias. And as you can see from the quote here from Dr. Pete Brooks, psychologically, we tend to make poor decisions when we're forced to act quickly. Our reflective brains are much better at trying to think through an issue or problem. If you think about time constraints, and let's say somebody sends you an email, right? Hey, it's the CFO. I need you to make a wire transfer. We're going to get this great deal, but we can't get it unless you make that wire transfer today. Otherwise, it's gone. Or it could be a personal email, right? Or something similar. Hey, here's a great offer. You better do it today, or else the price is going to go up, right? These idea of time pressures playing into the tactics that you see, and it's usually the case where you'll see kind of these urgency type language comments that you can watch out for, as you can imagine. But it's, again, playing on that system one thinking with regard to some of the tactics that the threat actor or the scammer is doing. Optimism bias. Most people just believe, well, it couldn't happen to me. I haven't experienced it before. Surely it couldn't happen to me. And this is optimism bias in the sense of when it's actually the case and you're in the middle of it, and then you realize you've been scammed, or you took an action with a threat actor that you shouldn't have. This is when you realize it can. And this is one, as I mentioned earlier, one of the key principles that the experts tell you that it's very important not to believe. Don't believe that it can never happen to you, because then it probably will happen to you. And this is just an example of optimism bias. And one thing that's interesting is, if you want to find more examples, right, just looking at scams, you could just do a search on, I just couldn't believe, or I couldn't believe it happened to me. And that's common language that you see with the victims, right? Just as I couldn't believe this happened, and I just lost my life savings. So optimism bias is certainly something that, a lot of people don't expect that somebody's actually going to reach out to them, whether it's through a fish, whether it's through a vish, right, a phone call, whether it's a text. They don't expect somebody's really doing that to take advantage of them in one form or another. Emotional bias. So this is really kind of interesting, because there's two sides of this one. So on the first is, there's been studies that have shown that if you had somebody, let's say they're having a bad day, they're just cranky, right? And all of a sudden they're getting pinged by, some threat actor trying to do something, kind of establish a connection. People in this kind of mode, right? They're a little bit, upset about something, what have you. They tend to be a little more jaded and harder to deal with for the threat actor, and more able or less susceptible to something that the threat actor or the scammer is trying to do with them. On the flip side, though, and that's more of kind of like a moment how you feel about something, right? The person starts asking questions of the caller or the person who's reached out, right? But when they're in that mode, they're just better about kind of spotting something or asking questions and not falling for that scam or that threat actor attempt. On the flip side, when you have somebody who's, let's say depressed, they're scared, they're fearful of something, they've got something weighing on their minds, that's when threat actors and scammers will absolutely take advantage of those things and listen for those cues and look for those opportunities to use your emotions to rev you up, and also get you in a state where you're kind of losing sight of the big picture. And here's another comment or quote from that threat actor that I cited in that article. As a master closer, I made it my first objective to get the victim under the ether. Ether is that fuzzy state when your emotions are stirred and you're so agitated that you won't know which way is up and which way is down, right? So emotional bias can really be used against you, and just something to be aware of. Reward bias. This is when the information is personally rewarding. We actually want to be gullible. That's from Joseph Paul Forgas, scientist, I can't pronounce it very well. Professor of psychology, UNSW in Sydney. And I included the image here of Bernie Madoff because this is a great example where people were invested with Bernie Madoff, right? It was this large Ponzi scheme that took place probably 15, 20 years, right? And you had people investing. Why did they invest? Why didn't they pull their money out? Didn't they suspect something was going on? Well, and didn't they suspect something going on even while they're getting, let's say, 12% annual returns every year without fault, while other times or everybody else was losing money at different periods? This gets into reward bias and that idea that, hey, there's something in it for me, so I don't want to look too much under the covers. I'm just happy and kind of plead ignorant. And that's what happened to these folks and how that played on them, right? They're happy to get rewards. Pretexting is another method, right, where your threat actor is actually getting enough information about you to be dangerous with it, right? And a big part of that is, whether it's connecting you, trying to connect with you on social media, or in this case, a phone call, they're going to use that information against you. And so if you don't have an idea what might be out there publicly, then you might be surprised at what they're able to tell you and then kind of convince you as you go that they're legit and you should do some type of transaction like in this case. And this is based on another common scheme, which is getting people to believe that there was an unauthorized activity on their bank account, get them to do a transaction under the guise of pulling that money back in, but in fact it's going the other way. So it's this idea of using information about you to get you to do something that's against your interest. Authority or trust bias is another one. This is very common, what we see with impersonation attempts in email or on the phone or other mechanisms. We see this in business email compromise, et cetera, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay, so I'm going to give you another poll question, but before we do, I wanted to just give you results on the scam and take a look at that from before. And it looks like, have you ever been a victim of a scam? 41% indicated yes, 47% indicated no, and 5% I don't know, and 5% I don't believe it'll ever happen to me. So glad to see that those were really low. Sorry to say about the folks who have been the victim of a scam, but if there's a silver lining to it, it makes you sharper and more able to kind of see things that might pop up in the future. Okay, so let me go back. Sorry, and I hope I didn't spoil it there, but let's shoot the other poll here. So give me just a moment. Okay, so I've been talking about all kinds of biases, and it's pretty serious stuff. So I wanted to kind of take into that authority bias side of this and ask a poll here. Hopefully I didn't just, let's launch it again. I might have ended it.
No, it's good.
Okay, all right, good. Okay. Based on the results, I think I did myself in on this one. I'm going to give you a few seconds, though, and let a few folks go before I get to the next slide, because that'll show you the results here. So I'll give you about 10 seconds. Get your answers in here. Okay, 5 more seconds. Okay. All right, so it was a little bit of a trick poll because if now you kind of taking a look at the list here and you reflect back on what I was asking the question, I kept the order the same. These are the top 10 phishing brands. LinkedIn is number 1. And this is all interesting, right? Because I think if I could poll people in this audience as to how many of these organizations on the left side do you deal with on a given day, you might be surprised and probably have 5 of them, right? I know I could look and go, okay, LinkedIn, Google, yes, Microsoft, yep. Probably getting a shipment from Amazon, yeah. WhatsApp, sure. Apple, sure. So a lot of these can affect us, but the real takeaway here is that if you think about any type of commercial or personal relationship with an organization that you have, really threat actors can exploit any of that, right? You've probably seen emails that say, hey, this is from your credit union, right? And you go, well, that doesn't apply to me. That's not my credit union. Well, it's somebody's credit union, right? So it's really important just to kind of recognize and accept that when it comes to unsolicited emails coming in or phone calls or social media, whatever it might be, you need to understand that your brand could be played against you through those channels, and just to kind of accept that. And a lot of what I'm talking about here is kind of accepting the reality and changing some of your behaviors. So just to summarize kind of all the different biases here, you can see, those that play on one side of your, professional persona on the left, or your professional persona on the left and your personal persona on the right. But of course, it's not to say that sometimes an emotional bias can't be played on the professional side, but some are going to be more likely on one side versus the other. But it gives you a sense of all these things, the ways we think that make us more susceptible, but also give threat actors and scammers, for that matter, a way to achieve their aims by playing on these biases. Okay, so let's talk about susceptibility and reducing the risk, because ultimately, right, when we think about this whole thing about our employees and the cyber threat landscape and what do we need to do? Well, it's all about reducing the risk of a breach. And of course, it's, at a micro level, it's also about alleviating a lot of the burden on IT and security teams as well, because they have to go and address these issues that pop up when you have an uninformed or untrained workforce. But I want to talk to you now about, well, how do you counter these biases? How do you kind of make yourself better at spotting scams and pulling yourself away from those? And the first is to be thinking in more of kind of that system 2 type thinking. And what gets cited by psychologists, I saw this in a few different things I was reading, was that when we don't have kind of a more methodical framework to go by, a process, right? That's when we kind of run into that trouble. We start relying on system 1 thinking and using system 1 thinking more than we should. And they cite, well, if you think about it, we all went through high school and college, we probably got, hit with the scientific method. And it's a really good kind of concept to think when it comes to these things, right? To be stopping and saying, well, what is this? What do I need to understand about this? What are questions I need to ask about this, or take a look at? How do I verify whether this is actually true or valid or not? And so it's really important to just kind of come back and think of this. It's not to say following the scientific method, in all steps in this flow, but the fact is that this is all about critical thinking, right? And we're trained on this in high school or college, for that matter, to be more critical thinking. We just kind of seem to forget a little bit that it's out there, and we need to go back to it. And that's back to that system 2 thinking, right? That's really essentially what it is. It is that's taking a slower, more methodical approach to, understand something that's happening and validate it, right? Whether, this is something that's true or legitimate versus it's not. It's a scam. It's a threat actor trying to social engineer me. This is another quote from our anonymous Confessions of a Con Artist. Victims don't ask a lot of questions. They answer a lot of questions. Victims don't read paperwork. They wait for you to tell them what it says. Victims don't look for why the offer is a scam. They look for why the offer will make them money, right? And so you can see here's kind of some of these biases coming out, like just in the last one. They look for why the offer will make them money. Reward bias. Now, you could also argue that optimism bias is playing here, because somebody's thinking, well, this is legit. It sounds really good. I've never been scammed, so it must not be a scam. So it just goes to show, right, these biases playing into effect, and we need to be thinking about how we can step away from them. And that just shows you from an actual telemarketer scammer perspective what they're able to play on and when it makes it hard for them to be successful. So the power of logic, let's get into a couple other approaches you can take and you really need to be applying, is in all these interactions, right? Unsolicited, a questionable email that comes in, an unsolicited text request or social media connection request, an email from LinkedIn coming in, right? Telling you about somebody's new on the platform, do you want to connect, and so on. You really need, and this can be true, is probably more so in your personal life, you need to separate the emotion. Leave the emotion out of it. Think logically, right? Oh, what's this about? Oh, this is interesting. Oh, this is a connection request from somebody I think I knew once upon a time. Is this legit? Let me go log in separately to that social platform and take a look and understand their profile. let me see if I can determine through completely separate means whether this is actually a legitimate request from this person that I once knew, right? So it's really just taking a more logical approach and leaving all emotion out of it as much as possible. By the way, when you have a scammer or a threat actor playing on the emotional side of things, right? Oftentimes that person is giving a lot of information on their emotional state or things that are concerning them, et cetera. And that just opens up the door for the actor to act very likable, right? That's another influence technique, to relate to the person, but of course, altogether they're looking just to exploit that person. Time pressure, urgency bias, right? Again, you think about sometimes when, hey, it's a deal. If you don't take it now, it's going to be gone. Or, hey, your CFO needs this wire transfer done by end of day to get this deal going. There's lots of language, and you need to look for those and listen for those indicators that tell you that there's a sense of urgency. And let's be real, if you think about your professional life, how often is something so urgent that you can't just stop, take a few minutes to think about, maybe take a few minutes to check on something separately? That's not going to end your job, right? So you can take those times, and you just have to kind of consciously think about, wait a second, this person's telling me I'm really kind of inundated with information here. I need a few minutes to digest. I'm going to hang up now. Let me come back to you, or I'm not going to respond to this email until I've checked a couple things, and so on. But really kind of putting time back on your side is a very important thing you can do. So I've outlined a few extra tips here, right in this deck. I'm sure will be made available, and you can take a look at that. But those are some of the key principles that you really need to kind of think about as it goes whenever you're presented with whether it's a threat actor, whether it's a scammer, right? And the behaviors that you see, because some of these things are going to be used, and if you can kind of be conscious of them and spot them to a degree, you'll have a better idea as to kind of the action you need to take. And the action you need to take usually is cut it off as quickly as possible. I put this together. I just call it the optimism scale, for lack of a better term. And I really just want to make the point of, when it comes to how to think about these unsolicited activities that you might see, or these things that just happen, right? Let's say it's somebody following closely behind you when you're entering a facility, right? You might be like, oh, I'm sure they're just an employee here. But you really need to be kind of on the side of the scale here, where it's all about cautious pessimism, or a glass half empty pessimism, so that you take the right actions, right? To stop that person and go, hey, are you an employee here? Can you show me your badge? Can you badge in separately? Can you hold on a minute while I go in and then badge in separately, right? It's an uncomfortable thing to do, but you need to take those actions, and you'll take those actions when you have the right frame of mind here, right? And so to me, that's where you need to be on the scale when it comes to these types of activities that may pose risk to your organization, or to your personal life for that matter too. All right, so let's talk about security awareness, and I'm going to throw out another poll here. By the way, if you guys didn't see the results, 33% of you indicated LinkedIn being the top brand, so that was dead on. Microsoft was another 33%. I could see why people would indicate that. And then DHL, FedEx popped in there. Didn't see any Google, which was interesting. I would have expected people to believe Google in that regard, but I guess that's a good mark for Google. All right, so let me go back to our next poll here. Just give me 1 minute. Okay, and this is really about, I just want to understand if you have a security awareness training poll at your organization. So, Lynn, do I have is it going on the background?
It is. We're all good.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to keep talking, and then we'll share the results. So if you think about a security awareness and training program, right, it really has kind of netted out at a macro level, right? What is it about? Why is it important? Well, it's important to protect your organization against risk that would be damaging. And that, as we talked about the targets earlier, that threat actors are going for, whether it's data, intellectual property, whether it's financial resources, right? Financial account access, and so on. That can all be very damaging, right? And really, it all comes to, we don't want a breach of our organization. that has an impact to organization, right? That's why you do security awareness training. That's ultimately why you need it. At a micro level, it's what I mentioned earlier, which is, trying to reduce the impact of an uninformed or untrained workforce on IT and security, right? Reduce the number of tickets involved in the investigations and the incident response associated, right? To reduce that as well. But there are other clear benefits to security awareness, as you can see here, right? It's a very healthy thing to have your employees be more knowledgeable on cybersecurity topics and things of importance. It's important for them to understand how to treat data and be responsible when it comes to data, handling data or handling their systems, etc. There's a lot of value to this, right? And ultimately, if I can sum it up, it's the idea about making your employees part of your security posture and not part of the problem. Ultimately, that's where you need to get to with security awareness. Now, we took a survey and put out a report earlier this year. And this is from that report, and this related to the ability of your employees to spot a malicious email. And we asked IT and security respondents, well, how confident are you in your employees being able to do that? And 88% indicated that they're moderately to extremely confident that their employees could spot a malicious email. We thought that was actually great news. We wanted to know, well, is that up or down if you were, thinking now versus 12 months ago? And 2/3 said it was, to one degree or another, it was, they had more confidence. And so again, another positive trend there. And then we asked, well, what are you doing to get this result, right? And 63% indicated that they're doing online security awareness training, 59% indicated phishing simulation or testing, 49% indicated in-person security awareness training. And as you can imagine, most organizations are doing probably 2 or even all 3 of these activities as part of a broader program, right? So key takeaway that we saw from this was that IT security folks, just like yourselves, see clear value in having a security awareness training program in place, right? Just clear value that they see. And if you think about, well, what does that mean for the organization? Well, that means reduced likelihood of a breach as a result of the human element. And of course, that's and likelihood of reduction in the tickets and inquiries and activities that IT and security teams have to do when you do have an uninformed workforce, right? Clicking on things they shouldn't, or opening attachments that they shouldn't, or somebody getting socially engineered and what have you, right? So IT and security professionals telling us that they see clear value in doing this. Now, what do security awareness programs do ultimately, right? What is it that they're really kind of achieving, hopefully, or delivering? And so I put this list together to kind of really call it out. And effective security awareness programs, do a number of things, right? So they take a programmatic and sustained approach to educate and reinforce learning through a variety of learning methods, content formats, testing over a span of time, right? So much like if you think of a campaign, whether that campaign is something in marketing or a program that an organization has, this is the same thing. It is all about an ongoing, never-ending process that you're going to be conducting to ultimately be able to measure along the way and at the end or at checkpoints, how effective are you in changing employee behavior for the better? Other key things here, right, is, like I said, they utilize a range of teaching methods and content formats, right? Usually interactive, using video and text and module-based content, trying to make it as interactive. There'll be learning quizzes and other kind of checkpoint activities along the way, and then follow-up, tests at the end, right, to test your knowledge, all to make it, kind of more engaging, more interesting for you. It's also generally more consumable in the sense of, right, we're moving away from the, hey, take this hour-long painful training and I'm sure you'll be asleep, halfway through it, to much more digestible content, right? Base modules that are maybe 8 minutes, 10 minutes long at most. Micro module content, which maybe is 2 minutes, 3 minutes at most. And nano videos, which are like a minute, right? So it's this idea of, hey, let me just put high quality content together, make the message real clear, and not take a lot of your time to get that message across to you. These effective security awareness exposes learners to key security concepts as well, right? I mean, if you think about it, it's not just about, hey, look for a phish email, right? Oh, hey, this might be a phish. Let me report that. We really need employees to understand some level of key security concepts as well, right? They have to have a vested interest and a certain level of knowledge as to the importance of all this. And so effective security awareness is also going to be providing education on key cybersecurity concepts for employees to understand as well. Exposing learners to common scams, attacks, right? They're more real, the better. Because after all, when you read if you read an article on a scam and you read it through and you see, wow, this is what happened to this person. Wow, God, there's a lot there. My gosh, never would have thought of that. Well, that helps people to internalize that, so when it's these kind of real things, it's going to have a bigger impact than if you're trying to do, let's say a creative little game trying to make a point. In my opinion, it's more of exposing to the very real scams, the latest of what's happening out there in the threat landscape, to help people better understand of what's really possible, what's really happening, and internalize that more effectively. It's going to help dispel biases such as optimism, the positivity bias we talked about, right? And be able to recognize certain behaviors, right? For example, hey, these are some common phrases that suggest urgency, and you need to be aware of when you see that. Or hey, here's something you want to hover over the URLs when you look at an email you're saying that's kind of suspect, right? Is one small thing you can do. It's going to test your knowledge right along the way through quizzes and what have you. It's going to be paired with things, real world testing where you can, such as phishing simulation, right? And then it's going to provide features of gamification. And what we mean by that, right? It's not little games. It's the idea of giving capabilities that allow you to make a little bit of a competition of your learners, right? In terms of who's taken the training, who's succeeded in the training, or which group is ahead of the curve in terms of completing their training and so on. So lots of factors go into a really effective security awareness program and approach. This just kind of shows you, right? It's that whole idea of this comprehensive, multifaceted set of activities and content types and testing along the way to help you achieve an overall objective. That program is going to cover a lot of ground, right? And you can see all these different topics that an effective program is going to make content available for your employees and others interested in becoming more cyber informed. Lots of different areas that the employees need to have some base or understanding on to be able to potentially spot something coming in from a threat actor, spot a social engineering attempt, or understand some of those things about that might affect them in their personal lives with their own personal computers and mobile devices and such. So I want to show you, just kind of run through some examples here, right, in terms of kind of training and what makes a good awareness program. And again, it's this idea of content that's more visually engaging, more interesting. It's not just a bunch of text on a white background necessarily, right? But helps you just kind of, in a more interesting way, follow the lesson and understand the key points to take away. And this is an example, right, where you've got this person or organization, they receive a message to connect, right? They get an email message to connect. And they look at that message and they see, oh, wow, it's this person, hey, they met them at a conference, right? And so they want to connect. And well, if you look at this, it might look pretty legit, sounds pretty legit, right? But that employee, that executive, whoever that might be, needs to understand what are some indicators that might suggest there's a problem. And it's security awareness training. It's going to kind of walk you through these scenarios, these real world scenarios to help you do that, right? And it should test you, as I mentioned, right? Test you along the way. And you might say, pick your response. Well, you could say, ignore, delete. I'm not going to do anything with that. And that kind of is the right answer. But the real answer is, doing research on it, right? Because it's not just about like ignoring it altogether and just trashing something, versus take a few moments to kind of be in that system to thinking mode to understand, what is this about? Do I think this is legit or not? It's going to expose you to various terms, right, in the cyber threat landscape that we use, whether that's smishing, which is SMS texting, phishing essentially through SMS texting, vishing, baiting, spear phishing for that matter, right? It's going to help educate you on those topics, but it's also going to educate you on more security specific topics overall. Zero trust, right? Well, people might go, what the heck is that? Well, it's a mindset. It's a way of operating and looking at security that says, don't trust anything. Always be validating that somebody connecting in, for that matter, is they say they are connecting from the right system with the right access, and they're only given access to what they really need, and so on. But imagine applying this principle to your own kind of mindset for something coming in unsolicited through all those different channels that we've talked about, and being suspect of it, right? Comes back to that optimism, line graph I showed you earlier, and how you should be thinking about it. Talked about other topics, right? Whether it's access control and what types of access control, like role-based access control. And then even when it's trying to help you understand these very important concepts, right? It's making it engaging, so it can kind of show you how they work and what they mean in a very real setting, right? You can see here Shane's bank does use MFA. This is just kind of running somebody through a scenario and how the presence of multi-factor authentication will benefit. You might have other things, right? Just matching the definition to its term. But again, it's this idea of kind of testing and interactive different approaches to make sure people understand these important concepts. Because it's not enough to just be able to say, well, yeah, I could spot somebody calling me and asking me about something. You do need to understand some of the kind of the background dynamics to really have a good sense of it. And like I said, become part of the security posture for an organization. Again, just showing different terms. It's important to that your security awareness training programs help you do that. So last thing is, as I mentioned earlier in the slide earlier, is just gamification, right? And this is just kind of a very simplified notion of that, but it's the idea of making your security awareness and training efforts somewhat of a game, right? Doing what you can to get groups to participate and be more active in it, be more interested in it and intentional versus, oh God, there's that compliance module I got to do. I'll put that off until the very last minute kind of thing. So gamification can help you kind of achieve better results sooner with your awareness programs than you otherwise would have without it. All right, so last thing I'm going to cover here, I just wanted to show you a little bit of email. This kind of is just an example to sum up a lot of what we're talking about. And email, as I mentioned before, is a very direct way for threat actors to target employees on their path to achieving some type of objective with a broader organization. And as you can see, there are a lot of threats related to email. There's inbound, meaning emails coming in, all these different nice threats: phishing, spear phishing, whale phishing, impersonation, email-based ransomware threats, and so on. Outbound, you also have risk, right, in the sense of what if data is on its way out through an account compromise, and how do you stop things like that, right, from sensitive data going out of the organization through a scenario like that. But it's also important to understand the building blocks of each of these, right, which generally you see there's malicious content, or something in the content represents risk, or there's a malicious file, or there's a malicious URL within the email that presents risk to an organization. So lots of things to consider when it comes to email. Now, what's tricky about email sometimes is this is an example of impersonation, and more particularly what we call business email compromise. And this is the idea when a threat actor is playing on an authority bias, an authority relationship, and they're reaching into the organization and to somebody who would be able to take action, take an action that they'd want. So in this case, the threat actor is pretending to be the CFO, reaching out to a director of accounts payable. If you imagine they've done their pre-texting or their research, so they know who is the head of accounts payable to do this. And so they send an email. And it looks pretty legit, right? And by the way, there's no attachments to this. There's just information. And a lot attachments to see if there's anything there. We look at links to see if the link might go to a malicious site or what have you. We look for other kind of clues to this, but these are ones where there's not a lot there to necessarily go off of. And email security solutions, sometimes these can, sometimes they do get through. And so it just raises that point, as you as an employee, just being that next layer of defense, right? To be able to spot this, that, hey, this isn't legit. And so if we kind of broke this down and applied some of the concepts we've been talking about, you might hover over the email here and see, well, this person's, it's the CFO from Fortinet, but I noticed they got two eyes in Fortinet. That's not right, right? And I might, you might take another look and go, well, hey, they're using urgency here. They're going to get urgency and reward. If you do this today, we're going to give you a higher level sponsorship for a lower level sponsorship price, right? And you might even look and go, well, this is interesting. The CFOs never call me Patrick. I go by Pat. So why are they doing that? Or maybe it's the CFO goes by Jan versus Janice, right? It's just, raising your kind of sense of looking at things, taking that system to kind of methodical thinking process and applying it here. Is this legitimate? Is this reasonable? And by the way, whenever you're in doubt as to whether you're not sure the answer there, always remember, whether it's personal threat, in the professional realm with threat actors trying to do something, targeting you, or it's your personal life, always you can ask a friend or ask a colleague, or in the professional setting, send an email to IT and security, or get on a call with them to ask them, right? That's what they're there for. They're there to do this, as you guys know. So there's different resources, and people just have to kind of apply it. But ultimately, it's about being able to think about these behaviors, think about the way that threat actors use psychology, right? Play on the biases. What are some of the things that kind of tip you off to that, so that you can make the right judgment. So I've been talking a lot. I know we're kind of coming up on the hour here, but just want to sum it up. At Fortinet, just FYI, we do have a solution out there. Feel free to take a look at it if you like. We actually made it available for organizations with 25 or fewer employees, as well as free for U.S. K-12 school districts here in the U.S. as an announcement with the White House back in July. But ultimately, just keep in mind, security awareness training, right, is, in our opinion, it's imperative. We are at a place with the threat landscape, for all those things I've been talking about, it's imperative for all organizations to be doing. And keep in mind, it does have value for the organization, like we talked about, but it's also value in the sense of both your professional and personal lives, right? Use those learnings, even in the professional setting with the security awareness training program, because a lot of those principles can carry over. So it has, value in a few different ways. So with that, Lynn, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Well, David, you did a fabulous job, covered an incredible amount of information. And I just want to thank everyone that was able to take the time out of their afternoon to join us here today for this presentation from Fortinet. And if you have any questions at all, please email info@WiCyS.org, and we can certainly navigate those questions over to David, and he could get those answers to you. But for now, it's at the top of the hour, so our time here is done. So thank you for everything, and we look forward to next time. Thanks, David.
Great. Thank you, Lynn.